My name is Bethany Johnson. Today's date is August 22nd, 2021, and today's day is Sunday. So today I will be discussing the final presentation regarding what I presented in Module 2 and what I presented in Module 9. We were asked to discuss 6 questions in conjunction with what our modules were. So I will go ahead and get started with question 1. What is this? Well, first I will get started what I actually did in Module 2. I discussed the nervous system, and in Module 9 I discussed the endocrine system. So number 1, what is the structural relationship between the organ system you chose in Module 9 or in Module 2 and in Module 9? Well, actually the hypothalamus would be the structural element, and that's actually considered the vital link, which actually links the endocrine system and the nervous system actually together. So the hypothalamus produces releasing and inhibiting hormones, which actually end up starting the production of other hormones throughout the entire body. So that would be the structural relationship between the nervous system and the endocrine, which would be the hypothalamus. Number 2, how are both organ systems related from the physiological point of view? Well, the endocrine system works along with the nervous system to communicate with the body's other internal systems. So these systems would work to influence human behavior, growth, reproduction, and metabolism, and so that would be how they would be related. And then the endocrine system also plays a vital role in emotions, which I was not shocked by because when you think about mental health processes such as anxiety or depression, most of those are released with different hormones, and so you can kind of see how since the endocrine uses and releases hormones that can play a vital role in the emotional stance of it as well. Also, the endocrine system is different from the nervous system that I did in Module 2 because the chemical signals are actually much slower moving and longer lasting than the nervous system. So, which I wasn't surprised by because within our nervous system, if you were to, put your hand on, let's say like a hot pad or maybe on the stove on accident, that's going to be a really fast moving signal because your initial response from your brain would be like, oh, this is hot, and then you'd have to take your hand off immediately. So knowing that the endocrine system has a lot slower moving chemical signals was not surprising because obviously the nervous system has much faster, but obviously that would be much shorter acting than the endocrine system. So that would be how they are related. Number 3, how does the disease you chose in Module 2 affect the organ system of Module 9? So the organ system, or the disease that I chose in Module 2 was Parkinson's. So how would Parkinson's affect the organ system, which would be the endocrine system? So how does Parkinson's affect the organs, or how does Parkinson's affect the endocrine system? So actually, dopamine exerts an inhibitory or stimulant action on some of the hormones, which would be endocrine, and that is actually produced in the anterior pituitary gland, which again is a gland or an organ, we would say, within the endocrine system. The dopamine content of the hypothalamus is actually reduced in patients with Parkinson's disease, which I found was really interesting because that makes sense for the physiological aspect of Parkinson's disease, but I guess it just wasn't aware that it was actually considerably reduced. With the dopamine was considerably reduced, and actually the nerve cells in one part of the brain actually progressively deteriorate, which I did know because that is why Parkinson's is there is no cure for Parkinson's, as I spoke in that presentation in that module. It progressively worsens, and what deteriorate means that it dies, it falls apart. So that I'm saying that like the nerve cells in one part, a portion of the brain actually they deteriorate, and they continue progressively. They also, the nerve cells normally produce dopamine, and dopamine is a chemical messenger to areas between the brain for muscle movement and also like nerve functioning, which again would be a part of the nervous system. Dopamine is also a neurotransmitter that is also produced in the hypothalamus of the brain. So again, how these are connected. A dysfunction of the dopamine system has been shown in different nervous system diseases like Parkinson's disease. And obviously, the hypothalamus is an organ of the endocrine system. So we can see how the hypothalamus is working again to be that vital link between both of these systems. So number 4 is, what are 3 important complications of the disease? Okay. So, well, number 1, just offhand, would be dementia. As the disease progresses, that we would say in the medical world, it progresses and gets worse over time. Many people with Parkinson's will end up developing dementia. And more than likely, it's because of these brain cells that are progressively deteriorating, as I just talked about in the last question. Can actually have dementia can actually cause a lot of memory loss, a lot of memory issues, and a lot of people don't realize that they end up having it because it progresses in such a slow process. Normally, dementia does not process quickly. It is normally over a couple years, unless there's some type of profound event that has happened. Sometimes that can stimulate and cause the disease to be quicker, but more than less, it can cause. It will get worse with time. Also, there is an estimate I learned that 50 to 80% people with Parkinson's actually experience dementia. So I figured that is definitely an important complication of the disease, because we're looking at half to 80% of people with Parkinson's at some time in their life will more than likely develop dementia. Also, another one is difficulty swallowing, which in the medical field we call dysphagia. What dysphagia actually does is it actually causes you to have take more time and effort to move the food around in your mouth, or any type of liquid from your mouth to your stomach. A lot of times people notice that they have difficulty swallowing. Typically, doctors will have their patients have a swallow study done, or see a speech therapist to order a swallow study done. And typically, diet implications would be changed, especially for somebody with Parkinson's, going from a regular normal diet, which would be normal meat that we eat, normal vegetables, to more of cut up meat, more of like a mechanical, which we say in the medical field. Mechanical meal would just be meat that has been ground up, maybe with a little gravy on there to help. And then as the progression gets worse, if the dysphagia gets worse progressively, they might have to move to more of a pureed diet, which would be just more of like a liquefied diet. So people are still able to receive the nourishment and the nutrients that they would normally receive from a typical looking meal, but just in a different stance, so they're able to swallow. And if it gets too bad, they might need to have a feeding tube for a short time until they're able to get maybe some more therapy to help the dysphagia. Also, the third one would be tremors. And people with Parkinson's don't have enough of the chemical of dopamine, like I had said in one of the questions. So, and dopamine, and because of the nerve cells in their brain that produce the dopamine have died, since that is the main component of what causes the Parkinson's, it can actually cause tremors. So having a low amount of dopamine in their body that they cannot produce because they don't have enough of the nerve cells in their brain to produce the dopamine, it can actually cause tremors, in which tremors are basically involuntary movements of the body. And when I say involuntary movements of the body, I mean any type of jittering of the hands. Sometimes it's legs, and a lot of people that are older that have Parkinson's, they might need to have a cane, or sometimes even be in like a walker or a wheelchair, because it is they're very unsteady on their feet because of the tremors, and tremors aren't an all-day type of thing, but you never really know when the tremors are going to start. So having a cane would be really good. Actually, one of famous person that has Parkinson's is Michael J. Fox. And even in some of his videos, or if you've ever watched any of his live interviews on the news, or just interviews in general, you can actually witness some of his tremors that he's having. And of course, that's not something that he wants to be able to show or have happening when he's live on TV, but it's just not something that he can control. So that is just something that I wanted to add into because a lot of people aren't really aware of what tremors are. Number 5, what are the main structural and functional changes in the affected organs when suffering from these complications? Well, with dysphagia, like I had mentioned, the difficulty swallowing, it involves the muscles and nerves within the pharynx and the esophagus in your throat. And that's actually the swallowing center in the brain. And the nerves that connect the pharynx and the esophagus to the swallowing center. Dysphagia, like I said before, can also lead to further problems. Even if it just progresses on its own, like I had said, you might need to have a feeding tube put into your body if you are not able to eat PO, which would be by mouth, because if your pharynx and your esophagus, which is the swallowing center, aren't able to function correctly, sometimes that can just be a problem in itself. But also, one of the most common problems of dysphagia is coughing or choking. And normally that's what we see in the medical field when we associate with dysphagia is anybody that's choking. And what can cause further problems when you have dysphagia is something that's called aspiration pneumonia. And what aspiration pneumonia is kind of is what happens when we choke and or it goes down the wrong pipe, which a lot of people say like, oh, I ate something and I started coughing and going, and then and for us, we normally feel okay because we're constantly walking, we're moving our lungs, and so it naturally gets eliminated and absorbed within our body. But somebody that has Parkinson's that might be almost immobile because of their tremors are so bad, they're not exercising very much because they can't, because of their tremors, they're just their body movements. Their bodies are not operating and moving the way that it once would. So any type of food that gets lodged into our airway and down to our lungs and it sits there, it ends up causing an infection, and that causes pneumonia. And when we are associating a choking mechanism such as dysphagia, we would call that aspiration pneumonia, and that requires urgent medical treatment, and it can also eventually lead to death. Then with dementia, that affects the brain, obviously, like I had talked about, and it's progressive, and it disrupts the memory and the thinking. It also eventually kills the brain cells, again, deteriorates the brain cells, also can cause forgetfulness, difficulty with language, remembering things from when you were little, colors, even recognizing your best friend, or even sometimes your wife or husband. So it definitely impairs. Dementia is a very sad and progressive disease. Very, very sad to see a patient or a loved one suffer through this, because it interferes with their life and your life. And it also affects the activity of the brain chemicals, which are neurotransmitters, and that's causing connection signals, that actually causes connection signals to get lost when trying to process their thoughts or any type of action. So a lot of times people with dementia have a lot of behavioral problems, or even like vocal, like swearing and cussing that they never normally did, but that's because, or swinging their arms, trying to hit people, and that's because these connections have been lost, and they're unable to process their actions or their thoughts, and so they're not trying to do these things out of despite, and they're not trying to say these words that they would normally do. These are things that are just stored in their mind, and the neurotransmitters are causing all these crazy chemical signals to kind of get lost, and they're all kind of going all over the place, and it's causing these actions or these vocal words to come kind of spewing out, or actions by movement. So that would be the dementia part, and then the Parkinson's tremors usually would start in your hands, and then they can also affect your lower limbs, like your legs, and actually any part of your body. The cerebellum part of your brain actually receives the information from other parts of your brain, and your spinal cord and the sensory systems. They also may experience rhythmic movements that would be like unintentional, and then also like hand tremors, which you do see a lot of, like Michael J. Fox doing a lot of hand tremors, especially when he's gesturing. A lot of times you kind of see this type of actions, or when you're talking with somebody and you're kind of wondering why their head is like on this little swivel. But a lot of times that is the unrhythmic movements that are causing this. And let me shut my door, I apologize. So that is kind of what is causing these unintentional rhythmic movements. So like I said, the most common that you would normally see with somebody with Parkinson's would be the hand tremors or the rhythmic of their heads. And then also, it can, I had talked about how dementia can kind of cause words to kind of get fluttered in your mouth. It can affect your tongue as well. Even with tremors can affect your tongue. And the tremors actually end up causing damage in your brain, affecting the nerves that control all of your muscles. So that's why the tremors, you see the tremors so much more visually. And it's also damage to the structures within the brain that actually control the movement. So that is what causes the tremors. And then question 6 is what is the incidence of the disease in the United States? I found this question really interesting because when I did the research on this to see what the incidence of the disease of Parkinson's was, I was actually floored because there is nearly 1 million people in the U.S. that are living with this progressive disease called Parkinson's. And actually, the fun fact that I learned, because I love doing my little fun facts, is that this is a number, this 1 million people is actually expected to rise to 1.2 million by 2030. So you think it's 2021 right now, and in just another so many years, it's going to expect to rise a 0.2 more million. So I just thought that was actually amazing that it's on the rise, and they're actually seeing this progressiveness and kind of wondering why are they expecting it to rise. So I kind of want to do some more research on that. But also back to the incidence. So I said about 1 million people are living with it within the United States, and approximately 60,000 Americans are diagnosed with this each year. And the Parkinson's does increase with age, but there's an estimated 4% of people that are actually diagnosed before age 50. So that is very low. So most of the times within the statistics realm, you're going to see people that are over the age of 50 because it does increase with age. And again, would come back as a whole as we're talking about the dysphagia, which those muscles can kind of weaken in your throat as we get older anyways, as well as the deterioration in the brain with dementia, and then also tremors as our body gets weak. So even if you don't even have Parkinson's, some of these, the 3 factors that I discussed, can kind of play with the conjunction of your age as well, if you don't even have any comorbidities. So the 4% of people that are diagnosed before 50 would be the estimate of Parkinson's. So not a very large amount of people that would be diagnosed at an earlier age. And I believe that Michael J. Fox was actually one of those that was diagnosed at a very young age. I believe that he was diagnosed when he was in his 30s. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember when that was the hot subject because he was coming out speaking about his disease process and letting people know what it is and that it's okay to have this and to do more research on it. So bravo, Michael J. Fox, for coming out, and so we can learn more also about Parkinson's, and especially in the medical world, to know that there are actors and famous people that are willing to share about their illnesses and their diseases. So I hope you enjoy this presentation. Thank you.